core issues associated with this webinar. One is many of us in the field who have been working in the environmental side of the equation, and particularly on alcohol policies and other drug policies, have been struggling with sorting out how to move and support coalitions in doing policy work. How do we get the policies actually happening more at the local level than at the state level? And as some of you may know, I train a significant number of folks in CADCA-related training. Some of those trainings called the academies, I actually work with 20 or 30 coalitions over 3 weeks of training within a 6-month window. And a large piece of that training, of course, is to build capacity for coalitions, but also to support the development, to support the coalition developing environmental and, in particular, policy strategies to affect the issues, what we call the local conditions in their own community. And one of the biggest, or most perplexing things for those of us who have been doing this work for a while and who have been doing training is we don't seem to be observing the movement at the coalition level towards the best practice policies that have been identified by CDC or through Alcohol No Ordinary Commodity, the book I mentioned in the first webinar, particularly around the evidence-based strategies. There's a fair amount of movement, I think, coalitions are working and doing a pretty good job of shifting over to implementing best practice programs. And you'll recall from the first webinar that the programs are those that are focused, what we might call individual-based strategies, versus the environmental, which tend to be more population-level or community-level interventions. And you may recall from the first webinar that the most powerful of all of the environmental strategies is policy, because it structures the environments where individuals are essentially living, working, playing, engaged in specific high-risk, potentially specific high-risk behaviors. So the policies are the gold standard, and we're seeing that it's a struggle for coalitions to move to this. So part of what I wanted to do today was to actually explore some of the struggle before we get into the problem solving around specific examples of your work, which will be the second piece of this, to actually explore some of the struggles that we have been observing, those of us who do this work and do this training, and have you reflect back with me on some of your own experiences. There will be some polls associated with this. They're obviously anonymous, so you don't have to worry about. You can answer them honestly. There's a little bit of soul searching in this first piece, I think. So let's get into it, and feel free to raise your hand. I'm going to be relying heavily on Allison to pick up questions, and Allison, of course, knows she can interrupt me at any point and say there's a question about this or a point that needs to be discussed, and that'll be great. So let's get into it. We have been, for nearly a good 15 years, trying to find ways to translate the science about what works: alcohol taxes, alcohol density, privatization, resisting privatization, enforcement, all of the strategies that I talked about in the first webinar, into actual policies. And so we're doing education, bringing best practice, showing you where the literature is. We're doing training. This is a form of training, but the training I mentioned a few moments ago with the academy is even more intensive. Many of you probably go to conferences, the CAD mid-year, others in which they're very hands-on. Here's how you do certain things, actual practicing, presenting a policy at a city council level, or practicing presenting to a school board, practicing the community organizing skills of developing one-on-one relationships with people to build the base power, providing then even technical assistance post-training and coaching post-training to coalitions and to coordinators on the implementation of the strategies themselves. What are some of the tactical decisions you have to go through? And even with this composite of inputs, training, coaching, education, and technical assistance, sometimes we don't see coalitions actually move to the policy level. To talk about moving to the policy level, they do some of the early work of policy, the community education, some of the events, some of the activities that are necessary to sort of prime the pump and get the community aware of what's going on. but rarely does it kind of get over the hump into the actual development of policy and the moving of the policies to the decision makers who actually have the power to give it to them. So part of what I want to do is explore this a little bit and sort of understand this, because I think it'll be both helpful for Allison and certainly helpful for me. And I've been talking to some of my colleagues who do this work nationally, and they're all sort of interested in hearing, what you all have to say about this. So in a sense, you'll be contributing to the field, I think, in terms of helping us think through this. So we've been exploring a framework that is really focused on the coalition coordinator or the prevention coordinator, the person who's responsible for moving the strategies in the context of a local community coalition. And as some of you may know, in the human relations field, when we see work, when a human relations consultant goes in and works inside of an organization, a profit, government agency, a corporation, and they see work struggling to get out, one of the first questions they do in the context of training and working with and doing the assessment of the blockage for moving work forward is the staff who are responsible to get this work done, are they able to do the work, or do they not want to do the work? And you can see this, and I'm going to explain this graphic to you because there's a lot going on, in the light blue boxes at the bottom, which says won't and will. And the folks who don't really want to do the work, they may be in the wrong position, they may have been, they may not be getting the respect they want from the company or whatever it may be, but the bottom line is that they don't want to do the work. And I don't put a judgment on that as much as if that is a critical part of an analysis. So when I was training last week, 2 weeks ago in Mississippi, in one of my academies, actually it wasn't Mississippi, it was a different state, we were going through week 2, and we were talking about doing policy work, and so I was talking with folks who were struggling with this sort of thing. I said, so tell me, why is it that your personal sense is that this work is difficult? And some of them said, you know what, we just didn't sign up to do this. I know we wrote a drug-free communities grant. I know we have some objectives and deliverables that we're expected to meet, but this isn't the work I really want to do. And so I just never get to it. I understand some of it better, but I just never get to it. And so when we think about the resistance of folks who may not want to do the work, won't do the work, we see a number of key issues that are contributing to that resistance. One is the general acceptance of what we call the population level model, which is the environmental strategies, and particularly policy, just sort of believing that raising the price of alcohol, according to the science, is the most effective prevention strategy for underage drinking and adult high-risk drinking. That is what the literature says. I can say that to folks, and they look at me and they go, I just don't believe you. And I say, okay, it's your choice whether or not you believe that. And the believing it comes out of their background, their experience, their own prevention training about how they have been trained to do prevention. Most of that prevention training, 9 out of 10 times, is focused on sort of working with individuals to kind of move them upstream, keep them from developing more severe alcohol problems or any alcohol problems at all, delaying onset of initiation. So there's the acceptance of the model, and that's grounded to some extent in your people's prevention training, how they have been trained to do this work, but it's not just that. Sometimes this notion of doing policy work that structures rules, regulations, laws, ordinances that dictate what has to happen in a community. You have to have a certain separation of alcohol outlets. You have to do X, Y, and Z. You have to take responsible beverage service. Some people chafe against the whole notion of being of having that kind of level of prescription, that they believe it's a more of an individual decision whether to engage in those kinds of behaviors, and there's a philosophical piece around this. So I get that as well. And I've certainly heard that. There's, as we continue to explore this resistance, in doing policy work, there's conflict. There just is. If you start talking about raising prices of alcohol, if you start talking about mandating responsible beverage service, if you start talking about putting certain school-based policies in place, the administration or school board putting school board policies in place, people aren't going to like it. Not everybody's going to like it. And so when you're doing this work, and as you recall, doing environmental and particularly policy work is about changing political, social, economic structures in communities. When you start talking about changing those things, you bump up against resistance. And when you bump up against resistance in the community and then perhaps in your own coalition, you get pushback. And many of us aren't comfortable with that kind of conflict in the way it plays out in the work. And so I've heard a lot of folks tell me, I just don't dig the conflict. I just don't want to do it. I don't want people yelling at me that I'm trying to take away alcohol or I'm a prohibitionist. I get that. There's also this thing, this kind of concept of being familiar with the political process. How do you move this work? Do you really want to be running a political campaign, which is what some of this is? You have to do it within the restrictions around lobbying. But at the end of the day, moving policy is political. Whether it's small p policy at school boards or Rotary clubs, it's a political process. And it's certainly political when you start talking about supervisors, planning commissions, and city councilors, city councilmen. There's at foundational to all this work, as I talked about in the first webinar, is this notion of community organizing as distinct from community mobilizing. Community mobilizing is trying to get a lot of people herding cats in Kmart, trying to get them all to go in a certain way, show up at a city council meeting, sending them emails, doing email blasts or telephone calls, and hoping they all show up to be there when something's going to happen, school board, whatever it may be. Organizing is very different. Organizing is relational, and it's about building personal relationships with individuals, finding the intersection between their passion, their interests, and the work of the coalition, and recruiting them to the work. Not recruiting them to the coalition, but recruiting them in tasks associated with getting the work done in the coalition. That organizing process is long. It takes time. Generally, we advise when you're doing relational organizing in the alcohol field that you may have 3 or 4 meetings with somebody before you ever do an ask. Would you like to help us write an issue brief for our policy, for example? And again, we're not trained to do that. We don't understand it, but some folks just don't want to kind of get out there and hang out with people in neighborhoods and hang out and meet with people in coffee shops. A lot of that kind of work, which has long-term benefits in terms of building a base of resident involvement, another area we struggle with, but it takes longer to get off the ground. And then finally, and there's more that I could have put in this blue box, but there's only so much space on this slide, coalition member resistance itself. You get fired up, perhaps you want to go and do this work, perhaps, or some aspect of this work, this policy work, and you go back to your coalition, you say, I just went to this training, this is what I found out, these are the strategies that seem to have the greatest lift based on the science, the greatest potential to reduce the problems that we've identified, and your coalition goes, we don't want to do this. That's not the kind of work that we're about. That's not what we're about. It's not part of our mission. We're about school-based work. We're about training parents. We're about educating the community. We're about tilling the soil so that people can do the right thing on their own. So all of these, or some combination of these, or ones perhaps I didn't even mention, are connected with folks, particularly coordinators, not wanting to do the work. And when that happens, we see a push towards, or us being a majority of the work of the coalition over here working on the individual strategies on the far left. Now, on the other side of the equation, there are folks who do want to do the work, but for whatever reason, their capacity may not be where it needs to be to make it happen. And so this is, the flip side, understanding the population model, being able to feel comfortable talking about what are community-based strategies, why do they work. There's a sort of familiarity with the science that coordinators have to invest their time in, reading the books, reading the journal articles, doing the background information. So when someone says, well, you tell me that it takes that enforcement of sales to minors compliance checks work, but you got to do them 4 times a year, 3 to 4 times a year in order for them to have the intended effect based on the science. And someone says, where'd you get that? You got to be able to say, well, it came from University of Minnesota, and this is what they found. So there's this different kind of learning that goes on around environmental strategies because it's not all in a manual. You have to go and dig for it. And so I think there's this whole familiarity with the science. there's the actual training of how to do policy work. There are steps associated with it. We know how to do it. There's a technology. Technology works. It isn't always linear. You can't turn the page and say we're doing curriculum number 2. There's a certain amount of this being on the balls of your feet and adjusting to the ever-shifting circumstances that come up when you're doing environmental strategies that you can't predict on day 1. Can't even predict them on day 3. You know, you don't know. You just have to sort of understand that there's this process you go through, and these are the steps, and you work them. And that may not be comfortable for some folks, sort of not having the clear guidance that you do this at certain points in time. There's this practice with the organizing skills. You know, when I do trainings with folks on relational community organizing, doing the one-on-one meetings, you know, my instructions will be to people, okay, go do a 5-minute one-on-one. Here's the scenario. And do not ask that person, do not mention your issue, except in the most tangential ways in this 5 minutes. Do not try to recruit someone to your coalition. And so the first one-on-one will be people being very resistant to the issue. Why are you talking to me? What do you want? You know, and then the second practice will be, hey, this sounds great. I want to join your coalition. And the tendency for us is to go right to the issue, and training ourselves to hold back and listen more so that we more deeply understand takes practice. And that skill set, again, is part of training. And then finally, on my short list here of the things that may be contributing to capacity of you and all the other folks out there in the country who are trying to do work to prevent problems, is this notion of the familiarity with the political process. And so being familiar with the political process and wanting to learn how to do the political work is the flip side of not wanting to do it because you're not comfortable with it. And so you see some of these are mirrors of each other, and obviously some are a little bit different. But the assumption of all of our training, the assumption of all of these inputs on the left-hand side, training, coaching, educating, technical assistance, from CDC, from SAMHSA, from Drug-Free Action Alliance, is that if we give folks the skills that are in the will column, that somehow it's magically going to move them to policy adoption or policy implementation or policy work. And we're not finding that to be true. And this then sets up the dichotomy about you all being able to ask yourself anonymously and honestly, do you really want to do this work? And you know, it's okay if you don't. I mean, we need folks who just want to focus on individual strategies as much as we need folks who just want to work on the policy and all that goes on to the, into the policy arena. And so we've begun to question the framework about thinking coalitions just because they said they were going to do environmental strategies in their DFC application really are going to do them. Or if they're going to do them, whether they're going to get them to the place where they actually happen. And of course, if they don't happen, then the benefits and the reductions and the problems that are essentially promised as a result of implementing them don't take place. And so we see certain things around this. There's middle ground here. It's not all will or won't. We see people and say, okay, I know I need to do this. The one that I think I could probably do and I'm most comfortable with is compliance checks. We see sales to minors and we're going to do compliance checks. And so perhaps they ask the police department, do you guys want to do compliance checks? Or we got some money, we'll fund you to do some compliance checks. And the police department says, sure, we'll do that. That'll be great. We believe in that work. And so you fund them to do the compliance checks or you help organize it. And then you can check that box off and you've done your environmental strategy because compliance checks are an environmental strategy. So there's gradations here. There's a continuum from really not going to do it, don't want to do it, don't talk to me about it, to yeah, I really want to do it, I'm going to do it. And then there's everything in the middle of this. And so part of what I'm asking you to do is help me understand, I think help Allison understand, because we've talked about this, some of what may be going on for you as you think about your work plan and you think about the strategies, the environmental strategies or the policy strategies that you maybe promised to have done for your funder or whatever it may be, and essentially answer some questions for us. So this is poll number 1. My coalition does policy work because 1, we believe it has the strongest population level impacts. 2, a coalition wants to. 3, we're funded to do it. D, we really don't do much policy work. And so I'd be interested in this first poll, if you would go ahead and remember, this is all anonymous, so we don't know who's saying what. If you would be kind of open and honest with where you are in terms of this particular question on your coalition's policy work. So Allison, I'll wait for you to give me a heads up when it's ready.
Right now we've only got about 60% of participants having voted, so we'll give you a second there to read through and make your best selection. I'd like to see us get up into the 90% here before we close the poll, so if everyone be sure you answer the poll question.
Yeah, folks may be thinking about this. This is a little different. Okay, so I'm looking at it now. I can see some of the results here, 33-33. So coalition wants to. Okay. All right, that's helpful. All right, I want to move to the next one, actually, before we do any discussion on this. So the next poll, come on, computer, go forward. The next poll. If I had more policy training, I would jump in with both feet. I would do more, but still maintain a balance with policy and individual strategies. C, I would do some, but keep or make individual strategies sort of the primary work of the coalition. So you do some of it, but really you're going to keep the focus kind of down on strategies 1, 2, and 3. And D, flat out, I'm not going to do more. You know, I wouldn't do more. So this is the sort of pivotal question here. If folks came in and actually spent time through coaching, kind of hands-on work, and bumped up the skill level of both your skill level and your coalition's skill level, you know, walking you through the policy steps, coaching you when you hit bumps, what would you do? I mean, would you really do more, or would you kind of keep your coalition where it is, or keep it kind of focused down at the other end? What would that look like for you? So that's poll number 2.
I'm going to keep the voting open here for just another second, hoping to get more folks to respond.
I don't see.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll. Let's look at those results.
Yeah, for some reason I can't see the polling results. Could you, I saw them a moment ago, but I obviously buried them somewhere on my dashboard. Would you mind telling me what they look like, Allison? Oh, here we are. Nope, that's not it. Allison, are you still with me?
Sorry, Michael, I've been speaking and have not unmuted myself.
Okay. I know that. I have done that many times.
Yeah, it's the fun of webinar. Okay, so 25% were A, if you still can't see this. A, I would jump in with both feet. That's 25% of our participants. 63% answered B, I would do more, but still balance it with individual. C is at 13%. I would do some, but keep individual strategies primary, and nobody answered D.
I wouldn't do more. Good. Okay. So I think what's interesting about this particular result is that a number of you mentioned B. I would do more, but still maintain a balance with policy and individual strategies. And I've certainly heard that with some of the folks, you know, with whom we've done training. And one of the interesting struggles in that equation about sort of trying to keep this balance is if your coalition is firmly rooted in the individual side, then the pressure on you as a coordinator is to stay focused on activities and events. And so it's almost as if you have tailwinds pushing you towards the individual strategies. The community wants them, coalition's comfortable with them, and I'm making some generalizations here, so this may not apply to each of you, but it's been what we've seen, is that that the coalition wants them, the community wants them, the public officials want you to do this stuff, and so everybody's pushing you to kind of do town hall meetings, or to do red ribbon weeks, or to do events at schools, or whatever it may be. And then your interest in moving towards the policy-based work, looking at alcohol outlet density, mandatory responsible beverage service with 4 compliance checks a year, things we know work, have headwinds. It's like coalitions going, this is too hard, this is too controversial, this is too whatever. And so the tailwinds push you towards the individual strategies, the headwinds keep you from moving towards the policy work if you're operating alone. And the premise has always been that coalitions would have your back, and they, in a sense, would drive the policy work. They would make it happen. And your role, in a sense, would be to stay in the background as coalition leader and ensure that everybody knew their role in doing the policy work, everybody had a place. And in a sense, you're kind of the mastermind of the campaign with perhaps an executive committee, but you're the one holding the majority of the sort of knowledge around how this unfolds. You're sharing it, and you're collaborating with some sort of small group, whether it's a policy committee or an executive committee, whatever it looks like, and then the rest of the coalition's like on board. And so, that's one of the interesting things I think we've seen is that the coalitions, being able to move the coalitions to a place where a coordinator may get to, particularly in B, which is balance between individual and policy, is quite difficult. So I wanted to reflect on that because I've heard a number of folks talk about B, and I think now that I'm trying to get my computer to advance, I'm lagging. I'd actually like to hear from you, and this is the rest of this webinar now is only going to work if folks are willing to chat some about this and just kind of get on and talk about it a little bit and reflect on your own coalition, your own experience with this, how you've been trying to move policy, some of the challenges you've had, and then we'll move into some specific examples that came out as a result of the homework when we finish this piece of discussion. So I'm just going to sit back and wait and see who might be willing to talk a little bit, and then Allison can unmute them. I know there's a little risk-taking and opening up like this, but
and I want to just, while we're waiting on someone to really chew on that, because I want you guys to think about, even if you didn't get time to do the homework assignment and you looked at it, if you were like, gosh, I don't even know what to put on this homework page, that's worth talking about and us having a conversation about where are you at and where are your frustrations and what is it that you need. And for Drug-Free Action Alliance, our attempt is to provide technical assistance and get you connected with expertise you might not otherwise get. And we're contemplating a very big event next spring, and that's bringing an alcohol policy summit here for 2 days in the spring and bringing in all the national experts like Michael and doing a big event that would be like the National Policy Conference that most of you can't get to, and having it in our own backyard. And, we like to think it's the field of dreams. If we build it, they will come. And then they will do something from it.
Yeah, they may come. It's always doing.
yeah. So I don't know who's Kevin Costner in this. I guess we'll let that be Tony Coder, our communications guy. So, I just would love us as a state and with the folks, here on the webinar, this is a place to have it. What's tough about doing this work? What's easy about it? Are you ready, but you don't have the coalition behind you? And you've got this national expert, Michael, who's done it on every level. And this is the time and the place to get some really good dialogue going here about how we get this work done, the real nitty-gritty of rolling up your sleeves and making it work. So I'm happy to take the risk to unmute everybody, but then if you all talk at once, it'd be a challenge. I'd love to see a hand come up so I know who to unmute.
Let me just reflect on the alcohol policy piece real quickly, because your conference, because the folks who would potentially you might want to invite or potentially would come and offer the kinds of things you'd be interested in having are sort of going through the same conversation. We're all having this conversation with each other. And one of the questions we would ask ourselves, frankly, to be really candid with you, is does it warrant putting the time into a state if the coalitions don't want to do the work? And I mean, that's the question we ask all the time. So I want to say, come do a tax, come train us on how to do alcohol taxes. And we're at a point where we're going, show us that you've got a constituency who's ready to do it, and we'll come. But we're not going to come and just educate you guys about it. You know, you can go somewhere else and get that. But if you really want to bring in a bunch of people who are going to kind of invest a whole lot of energy, because once we come into a place, you know, we're vested in seeing something happen. And it's not, we don't just blow in and blow out and go, gee, that was fun. It's more about, okay, what do we need to do to make sure, you know, we went to Ohio, we talked about these 4 interventions, we identified some coalitions who are interested in it. What do we need to do to make sure that we support Drug-Free Action Alliance or whomever, so that that work progresses? And so, you know, this is a really important piece for us. We're all evaluating, we all have limited time, we're all evaluating where can we get the biggest bang for our buck in moving this work forward at the national level. So I'm really, really pleased to hear you're thinking about something like that. And I think, you know, it'll be very helpful for us to know how you all are responding in terms of saying, we'll do the work, you know, if you guys come. So.
Excellent. So Stephanie's had her hand up there for a while. I'm going to unmute Stephanie, and then we'll see if Angela has audio. Yeah, we can get her unmuted, and it looks like Angela's got a lot of thoughts too. So Stephanie's first. Angela, you're on deck.
Okay, I guess I'm unmuted.
You are.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, you
fabulous. One of the biggest things for me is just where to even start with policy. That's pretty much where my thoughts are right now, is just where to even start and how to even. I know that, you know, a needs assessment is sort of all part of deciding what policy you would even pursue, but it's just even kind of getting that conversation started.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, the question about what policy is completely and totally linked to what the problem is. You know, so if you've got sales to minors at off-premise locations, off-sale outlets like convenience stores and so on, then you know, your policy may very well be a mandatory server training, local law. And so if you can articulate, and I know you can, but if a community can articulate the 3 or 4 hotspot, what we call local conditions, you know, the things that are happening that are sort of begging for some policy response, we can tell you what to do. I mean, or I put that wrong. We can certainly say what the science says you should do. That's what I meant to say. And then we can tell you how to do it. And so I guess what I'm picking up from you is you don't have any concerns necessarily, or maybe you do, but you haven't articulated them about kind of moving into that political landscape around doing policy work. Let me stop there and ask, you know, what your reaction is to that sort of understanding that that's what it takes. How does that hit you?
Well, for me, I actually work with a number of coalitions, but the main coalition that I work with has a legislator that is very involved in our coalition, and I know hands down that we would at least have his support in moving forward in attempting a policy change. But I guess where my concern would come in would be, depending on what that policy change is that we would be pursuing as a coalition, kind of how much support you would have. You know, you may have some people that, you know, want to see policy A changed, and you may have some people that want to see policy B changed. And, you know, at some point you kind of have to get a decent amount of people on board with one or the other.
A ton of them. I mean, that's the
yeah.
organizing piece. You know, if you want to do a mandatory responsible beverage service, for example, and we know that mandatory RBS works around sales to minors and other outlet issues as coupled with enforcement, you can betcha the Chamber of Commerce, all the business associations, the Downtown Merchants Association are all going to be hammering your local either county council, county board, or your local aldermen or selectmen or city council members, wherever you're going to do it. They're going to be hammering them, saying, don't even think about doing this. And so selecting the policy then implies you've got to do this tremendous amount of base building your own base of political support through residents, nonprofits, schools. You know, you can imagine who might be in favor of something like that. But it means 6 months to 9 months of just building the foundation for it, and then having your coalition stick with you when the going gets tough. And folks are getting nasty calls from the chamber saying, "What are you, neo-prohibitionist? You're gonna take all the money out of this. Businesses can't." You can imagine what you'd hear. So this process of understanding what your local condition is, or the hot issue that needs selecting the intervention, the policy intervention, and then doing the analysis, who's in favor and what are we going to have to do to build a foundation of support for it is at the heart of doing this work. And I think what happens is a coalition will say, look in the literature, talk to some people, this is the policy, RBS, mandatory enforcement. They pay for it, we don't pay for it, maybe you pay for it. And as soon as the word leaks out that that's the strategy that the coalition is thinking about, because your coalitions are meaning Republican and so on, then the opposition to it rises up almost in an immediate visceral reaction and starts hammering the coalition. And you haven't had then the time to spend building the support for it who can push back on the chamber and say, not so fast, guys. This is about underage drinking. This is important. And so that opposition so dramatically overwhelms the coalition's initial willingness that they say, well, there's just no support. We don't have the support. Too much opposition. You may even have city council people calling you and say, don't go down that road. Not a good idea. We're not going to do it. Doesn't mean they're not going to do it. Doesn't mean you can't win. But the pushback happens so fast that the coalition bails. And so that, I think, this is why we're talking about this, that may be part of the dynamic for why a coalition, after having identified a policy that makes sense, doesn't pursue it any further, is the fact that the coalition may not be willing to sort of stick to its guns and say, we're gonna go out and talk to lots and lots and lots of people about this, and we think there is support for this, Mayor Smith. So we're happy to discuss it with you, but we're not ready to do that yet. We'll talk to you in 6 months. Whatever.
Yeah,
so
and
anyway,
I guess
Stephanie,
a lot of that too. No, that's fine. I guess a lot of that too depends on your membership. Having, like you were talking about earlier, the capacity part of it, kind of having those people behind you that are willing to go to bat, for something they
right.
believe in
right.
about policy.
Yeah, absolutely. My experience in working with coalitions, if a community calls me in to sort of work with them around a policy stuff, I hate to say this, but generally speaking, 3/4 of the people on the coalition are the wrong people for that.
Yeah,
it happens. I'm just being really honest with you guys now.
No, it happens. I mean, you know.
Yeah, I'm tipping all of my hands here. It's like we're having a confidential, the cone of silence has come down over this webinar. But it's, I get in there and I start doing one-on-ones with the coalition members, and they're going, you don't want to do this, or I hate that kind of stuff, or oh, everybody's yelling at me, my neighbors are yelling at me, whatever it is, and so, around social host ordinances, local social host ordinances, one of the areas that frankly are what we consider to be low-hanging fruit for policy work at coalitions that have some impact. When I've had neighbors yell at me about talking about code. What are you talking about? You're taking away our freedoms as a parent. It's like, oh, good God. And so, yes, the working in policy, these are the lessons that are beginning to come out here, really requires, in a sense, restocking your coalition with folks who want to do it. I mean, it talks about you can think of it as a rebuilding or a repopulating or an addition to. But the truth is that when you start doing this kind of work, some of your coalition members are going to bail.
And that's okay.
And it just is. And I know you have, those of you who are DSCs, have 12 sector representatives, even people there are people within the same sector. There are faith community representatives who want nothing to do with policy, and there are faith community representatives who love it. So, you may have a faith community person who's representing who just goes, we're about programs. We do that. And then you may have others who are trained as deep community organizers, and they want to go out and you go find them and go, well, thank God, somebody's finally doing something around this. So, even within your sector representation, you've got a range of interest in doing policy or more individually focused strategies. So, Stephanie, any other sort of, when you think about some of those pieces, my sort of candidness around changing membership or losing members or whatever, how does that sort of affect your thinking about your willingness to kind of go down that road at all?
It doesn't really affect my thinking so much about going down that road. People have left coalitions for a lot less than policy work. So, As far as I'm
good
concerned.
Point. No, that's a good point.
I mean, it ebbs and flows, you know. I mean, you have one year you could have a tremendous showing, you know, of people who are willing to you know, kind of hit the pavement and ground out the hard work, and then, you know, the very next year, for whatever reason, you know, you're down to kind of bare bones, and you have to kind of go back to that individual activity stuff because you don't really have the support behind you. So, you know, it doesn't
well,
really
the good news is a lot of the individual stuff supports the policy work. You know, doing a town hall meeting around social hosting sets up your campaign. So it's not that these things are opposites of each other. It just means that the work that many coalitions have been doing that are activity focused can be kind of turned to support the policy goal, the policy agenda, you know, that may materialize and may operationalize 6 months or a year down the line. So, yep, good. Well, thank you. Thank you for jumping in first and being willing to talk a little bit about it.
Well, thank you for answering my questions. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. So I'm going to try unmuting Angela. She's got a few things in the question box there, Michael, if you want to look ahead. Angela, I am not able to unmute you because you are not signed in with the audio. So I'm going to go ahead, and if it's okay, Michael, I'll read Angela's input.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It says, we have done some policy work, especially a coalition to amend Ohio's social host law. Angela's part of the Youngstown area and coalition that is really that combined with another coalition out of Cleveland, just Michael, for your background, has been doing most of the groundwork and taking the leadership and getting all the other coalitions as much as possible signed on to amend our statewide social host law, which has a knowledge standard that is difficult for police officers to meet. But we keep running into opposition, going back to what Angela's writing, and then lame duck sessions, and of course they're so focused on the budget and now Medicaid expansion, there's always something that is overwhelming what they look at. Okay, so after several years, we aren't even certain whether to continue with the coalition to amend Ohio's social host law. We would embrace a policy boot camp. At best, we feel like novices. We need training to lead our willing masses through the issues.
I love the language. It just gladdens my heart to hear willing masses.
Yeah. And Angela just added in, I have found that our members want the roadmap to doing the work. It would be helpful to have the skills to construct that roadmap for them.
Yeah, so okay, a couple of things. First off, the roadmap will start in LA and it will meander into Mexico, and then it might head up to Kansas, and then maybe down to Louisiana, and then you're going to make yourself through Alabama, and maybe you'll get to New York City. I mean, there's no straight road. That's what makes this stuff so difficult. It's, you know, you get on I-80 thinking you're going to drive across country, next thing you know, you find yourself in Texas. And so that can be daunting to folks because it's not linear, but there are steps and there are processes in each step that we can train you on, or someone can train you on, you know, that help you do the work. Your question about the state level piece is really, really a good one, and we folks who do this work all the time and think out loud with each other, this sort of state level policy stuff, have come to the conclusion that unless you have to do a policy at the state level, like excise taxes, we don't recommend doing it because the power of the alcohol industry is so strong. Now, the alcohol industry, you would think it wouldn't necessarily be concerned about social hosts because it doesn't threaten their retail or distribution kinds of economic concerns. And yet, in the background, they're whispering in legislators' ears, you know, stay away from this, and in some cases they're actually supporting it. So I think it depends on state to state. But the willingness of legislators at the state level to do social host is always going to be defaulting to a standard, one that's criminal. Therefore, you've got the knowingly standard, or you've got the furnishing standard, or the should have known standard, whatever it may be. That makes it, as you said, very difficult to make the case. And so as a result, we're encouraging communities to do local ordinances, to identify their own local conditions, and then develop their own local social host ordinances that are civil in nature, so that you don't have the same burden of proof. There's no misdemeanor involved, so you haven't got to prove intent. And to actually move their policy work to the local level, where you frankly have a much better chance of mobilizing a constituency of support. Even in communities where the initial kind of blush of response to a civil social host ordinance with a fine, and it may be, oh, you're treading on our parental rights, or it's safer to let kids drink in our house, whatever the arguments are. We know what the arguments are. Even in those communities, there's a subgroup of parents who don't want their kids drinking in somebody else's house. And the organizing is finding those folks. And then they'll get enough of them and they overwhelm the others. And then the policy work shifts from the state level, where it's very difficult to get traction for an ordinance or for a law that moves to a lower burden of proof so you can do fines, to local level, where you can get that in a much, much easier way. Most states allow social host laws to be done locally, and even the ones that don't, we can find workarounds. So I guess my thinking out loud with you has been that whenever we've tried to do good state-level alcohol policy, we generally get our butts kicked, and or they enact stuff that's so weak that it doesn't work. And so, I'll give you another example. In California, before I moved from California 18 months ago, every year we had discussions in Sacramento, in our state capital, about doing a state-level responsible beverage service bill. And every year, we preventionists came out opposing what got finally negotiated, because it was so bad that it would undermine the good work that local communities were doing. And so we basically, we'd go in, we'd sit down, we'd propose a bill, we'd give them a model bill, we'd say this is what we need, and it'd have all the best practice and evidence in it. They'd look at it, and by the time that thing got done, going through the meat grinder of the legislative process, it would come out and it would be one page, and it would be horrible, and we'd have to oppose it, and we'd try and kill it, and we did kill it every year. So that's what's happening around social hosting. Almost every state's law is criminal, the type that you have in Ohio. And every state that I know has tried to get it amended to make it civil is lost. They just can't get it going. And so those folks are turning back into the local level. There may be tactical and strategic value in you continuing to push at the state level. So you create a little smoke and action up here to keep people busy while you move systematically at the local level simultaneously to make something happen there. So I don't know if that makes sense. That's a great tactical question about what to do around it, because I'm familiar with your state process. I know I've read the state law. I've looked at your recommended law, and also know that how close you've come, and yet how it continues to sort of just elude you. So my recommendation would certainly be to work with getting some localities, some municipalities who are ready to do it, get 2 or 3 or 4, and start moving them locally to set the stage for
and Michael, if I could jump in.
More action.
This is Allison again. We tried to utilize within our case, making the case and the case statement we put together for the state law change, that we've got 2 communities already that have done that, and that if coalitions and we do this work, that one, the municipalities would become a patchwork of a whole bunch of different laws, and wouldn't it be better to have consistency, and that 2, we've got a ton of rural, more township areas where the ordinance would not apply, and there is no legislative body beyond the state to govern that. You can't do a local level policy in a whole lot of the geography of Ohio. And so you end up even in a community like just outside of the Columbus area, like Dublin has one, and then even if Hilliard got one, there would still be a ton of space in between that doesn't have one. Right. And it's all possibly, it looks like a continuous neighborhood, but by jurisdiction it's not. And so we wanted to avoid the patchwork and tried to use that as an argument for it. Of course, didn't get very far. But that's a challenge that I know a lot of people talk about, is that a local ordinance is geographically limiting.
It is, but you're right. The big picture, you're absolutely right. The big picture of trying to get something where you have, I forgot, Ohio has restrictions on working in an unincorporated area like that. Other states don't. But if I was a legislator and I'd seen 2 cities do it, and you tell me that you don't want to have a patchwork, I'd say, come back when you got 30, and then maybe we'll talk. I mean, I think the pressure to create consistency between incorporated areas, municipalities, and then unincorporated with the state's, social host law would have a better shot at actually being enforced, is only going to happen when you have created enough momentum where they can't ignore it anymore. When they're going, okay, I got it. You guys have done 30 30 municipalities have done this. They all are civilly focused. These seem to be working. And then you've got 30 municipalities and constituencies in 30 municipalities who are much more likely to pressure their legislators to do something just outside their boundaries so that they don't see the, waterbed effect of suppressing it here and popping up there. So I wouldn't, that's why I'd say simultaneously it may be a good idea to bring more folks online at the local level, use the constituencies that organize to get them done locally, and then they become your troopers to kind of go out there and push the legislature after you've got enough of them where they can't ignore it anymore. And that's the way it actually worked around the RBS. For years, the state wouldn't even consider a mandatory RBS bill. And now we've got, we've probably got 30, 40, 50, we've got maybe more than 100 or more cities who enacted mandatory RBS. And now they're going, we got a patchwork, we better do something. But still, they can't do what's right. But at least now they're willing to look at it because so many municipalities have it. Until then, they won't do it.
Thank you. So Elizabeth has had her question here. I'm going to try unmuting Elizabeth. Her audio's been going in and out. Let's see if it's in at this time. Elizabeth, you're unmuted.
Okay.
Can you hear us, Elizabeth? Yeah, she's having a lot of audio trouble. Let me read Elizabeth's comment and see what you have to say to that, Michael. I keep losing my sound, but I wanted to say that I am not able to do much policy work because of the funder to my program. We are only funded to do education in schools. I would love to get involved in something with another coalition working on these issues without rocking the boat of where I work.
Ooh,
and
yeah,
I did not use your last name, Elizabeth, because of the cone of silence.
Yeah, the cone of silence is not, I don't even know who Elizabeth is. So yeah, I mean, if you've been hired to do it, then it makes it very difficult to do individual programming stuff, and that's fine. I mean, if that's what your work is, that makes total sense. And obviously, trying to push your funder in a different direction is, potentially professionally dangerous for you. So, but I have seen, and I don't know what community you're in. Don't know any of the specifics, obviously, of what kinds of issues you've got. But if you're in a community, or if you live in a community where there's some legitimate need, or there's an existing coalition in your community that may be focusing on tobacco, or maybe focusing on healthy living, some other kind of structure in place where you could attach an alcohol policy agenda, then I think that would be helpful. I do believe that there are communities who want to do alcohol policy. Increasingly, the food people, folks who are working on food policy, are keeping their eyes and focus on some of the retail stores that are they're more like liquor stores than they are actual food stores, and have begun to partner up with individuals who also want to focus on these settings. So there's a lot to sort of think about in terms of what community you're in and what your issue might be, and whether or not there's an existing coalition that you could kind of move an agenda into, or if you had the real interest in time, and time being a big consideration, I've seen people start what could be considered ad hoc or kind of temporary alcohol policy groups to go after a particular policy. It's resident-driven, it's volunteer, and those, frankly, oftentimes are really, really powerful because their local decision makers can see that they're not being paid to do it. So if at some point you actually wanted to talk about that, I would be happy to sort of have an offline discussion with you around some opportunities in that regard and just what's going on in your own community. So if you decide to venture out and do some work on your own, just feel free to touch base with me.
Excellent. And Elizabeth, I'm going to let you know that Angela McClellan from Youngstown in Mahoning County, she says we've got a seat at the table for you, so come join them anytime.
Well, there you go.
And if you're not in their geographic area, I see that you're asking the question how you could find out what coalitions are around in your community. And I would call in and ask to speak with Emily Brown. She can at least let you know of the coalitions currently SPECA members, as well as looking at our past roster lists. And we're pretty in the loop about what kind of coalitions are going on all around the state. So,
including those that aren't substance abuse related?
Well, not everybody has, like we're right now re-upping our membership for our annual membership in the Statewide Prevention Coalition Association. So we have a current roster, but we can also look at the past database in case some of the folks closer to her exist but have not yet re-upped their membership.
So yeah, that would be great. And then also, depending on how this works and what you have geographically close, I think you could also go to your health department and say who's working on some of these other issues, who's working on tobacco, who's working on food policy, who's working on active living, and there may be some other possibilities there too. So that's great.
Absolutely.
Anything else? Or should we? Are there any questions, or should we move into the last piece of the slides that we've got?
There are no new questions and no hands raised at this time. So your next slide
Okay.
might be some good discussion.
Well, thank you very much for discussing that, all those points. It was very helpful to hear sort of your thinking on the sort of core issues I was raising. So we did get a little bit of the homework back. I'm trying to get rid of this thing. There we go. And what I did was I created a couple of slides that were sort of case study oriented without a lot of details. And so in one instance, we had, and I'm not sure if this person's on the phone or not, so feel free to jump in if you are, and you can give us more detail. But we asked that you identify a risk factor of one of the 4 Ps, place, price, product, or promotion. In both instances, they were place focused. And this is such an amazing local condition. By local condition, what I mean is the sort of local manifestation of the risk factor of place. So place is a risk factor in every state and every community. Same with price, product, and promotion. But what that place condition looks like, what it looks like in your own community is what we call the local condition. And in this community, there is the sale of K2 bath salts and alcohol taking place to students from 2 carryout stores that are located close to their school. And so we've got, if I understand the local condition, which is a paragraph that I tried to summarize, kids know where they can go. Maybe there's a magic word or a magic handshake, and if that happens, then they'll give them either alcohol or bath salts or K2, whatever it may be that they've got below the counter. And so the question I wanted to pose to everyone here are what policy options are there? But before I do that, I can't remember. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name. I'm sure maybe it was Heidi who submitted this, but I think she might have had to leave early. Is the person who submitted this case study still with us on the webinar? If so, maybe you could raise your hand.
My memory is that was Heidi. She did leave. Yeah.
I think she had to leave early, right? So this is a really interesting one, and so I'm. One of the first questions we had today was, I don't know what policy to start with, and that's the right question. What do I do? And I think generally what we tend to do is we want to try and educate the community about the problem, and yeah, you got to educate the community about this particular local condition. But is there another policy that could be thought about that would essentially respond to this particular local condition? Or if not a policy, could there be a formal sort of public policy? Maybe there's an institutional policy, or maybe there's an enforcement effort that could be engaged, which would also be an environmental strategy to address this. So I'm interested in just some folks thinking out loud a little bit about if this happened in their community, what would they do? That's kind of the question, particularly from an environmental perspective. So I'd like some hands, and we can kick around some ideas. Anybody have any thoughts about how if they found out that kids were getting these things at a couple of carryout stores close to school, what they would do? This, by the way, happens far more than we know. Okay.
I'm happy to venture a thought if no one's got one.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, here Elizabeth came in. I'm thinking of the best way to approach this is to continue to bother the Drug Task Force to investigate the situation. Elizabeth, are you talking about law enforcement? Because that's where I thought might be a first information gathering place to go. She says yes, to find out how much law enforcement has them in their sites, and have they recently done a compliance check? Have they already dealt with this place and they're just doing a reformulation of K2 or bath salts and thinking they're legal at this point? So one thought is to reach out to task force, including law enforcement, to get more information about that site or those sites.
Good, absolutely. That would be a huge, really important thing to do, so you don't put your foot in your mouth and say, oh, we got this problem, and find out, one, that there's undercover activity already happening related to it, or two, it's not what it appears to be. Allison, did you have a comment before I launch into some thoughts on it as well?
No, though Elizabeth did just jump in. I know that they just recently made these illegal to sell or possess, so maybe they have not caught up with it yet.
Well, if they hadn't caught up with it, why would it be under the counter?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, part of what we're hearing, or part of what at least I insinuated from Heidi's description of it, was that you had to sort of say the magic word, you know, go in and like the Sting, kind of, you know, do some hand signal that would suggest that you know. So let's assume for a moment that the research has been done, and in fact, law enforcement maybe kind of sort of knew about it but isn't doing anything, and that in fact is happening. And you could have conversations with youth who could report it. You know, you've done enough reconnaissance that you believe that it's real. And so I think from the purposes of looking at this as an example, we should go ahead and make some assumptions that in fact it is happening, and it's happening. This happens with alcohol all the time. You have merchants who sell to people they know. This is kind of the equivalent of that. You know, this is stuff behind the counter that they're actually pulling out and giving it, selling it to them. And so what do you do? What do you do with that? Let's think a little bit. If you go in and try and do compliance checks, probably it won't work because they're not going to know the decoys, and the decoys won't know the secret signal. So that's probably not going to work. Cops could send in compliance check after compliance check, and they're not going to be able to do anything about it because they're not going to sell to them. So it's gonna, what's going to come back is there's no problem, but in fact there still is a problem. Another possibility could be to work with law enforcement to put undercover people in stores, but that's probably not going to work because, the cops and shops, those programs really are done collaboratively with the merchants. So merchants aren't going to agree to it. You can't put someone undercover without permission for very long before the clerk is going, why have you been here an hour, wandering around looking at sodas? So that's not going to work. You could go to the city council, so if we bump this up a level, and talk about having a sort of a candid conversation about how difficult this is to catch, and that you would like increased fines for anybody who is caught, or fines or actual, perhaps pass an ordinance where there's violations of these kinds of things. You can revoke their permit to operate in the community. There's lots of legal issues we'd have to work out. I'm just thinking out loud now. You may or may not have the local authority to do that in your municipality, but many states allow their communities to revoke local use permits as opposed to licensing state level if it's an alcohol outlet. Now, this is not an alcohol outlet. It's just like a smoke shop who also happens to have alcohol under the behind. We don't know that. That's why I was hoping Heidi might be on, but I'm making the assumption right now that it's a carry-out store, meaning it's an alcohol outlet. So, the probability of doing an enforcement action in a formal way is unlikely. You could certainly go and begin to have policy conversations with your decision makers, your city council or whatever, and say we need to do a big public awareness campaign with a policy at the end, an ordinance at the end that increases the fines, and maybe just the threat of the fact that everybody's talking about it and they know what's going on might be enough for these guys to back off for a while. The other thing that could happen, and this, I've been involved with this, I've seen it happen, I've organized it, is in those stores where bad things are going on. In the case of the one I'm going to tell you about, we had drug dealing going out the back door. Cops couldn't catch it. Cops wanted to catch it. It wasn't like they were ignoring it. They just couldn't catch it for any number of reasons. And, the church was saying it's going on, and everybody was pissed off about it. And so it was real. And we couldn't seem to get our arms around how to do this. So what we ended up doing was our coalition picketed the store. They got up. They took signs. They carried placards. And as they marched down towards the store on a Sunday morning at 11 o'clock, right when church was coming out, the church that was close by, the clerk came out, the manager of the store came out and said, all right, we're not admitted to anything, but it won't happen anymore. And that's what it took. And the coalition was prepared to go to the mat and actually do a media advocacy event. So of course we had TV stations from this was in the Bay Area, it was north of San Francisco. We had TV stations from the Bay Area waiting. We had the newspapers there. I mean, this is juicy stuff. Local coalition picketing a store for drug sales. Oh, they were ready to put that on the evening news. So they were disappointed, but we won. And what happened was we saw that then spin off to the other places that we suspected happening, and we got reports that stuff had dramatically calmed down. So the policy piece here is trying to get a stronger response. The difficulty with the policy piece is that it's difficult to bust them. So the dialing it back slightly, and this is why these environmental strategies can be controversial. Dialing it back to, if you can't get enforcement for whatever reason to sort of pick this up, if you can't get on the radar, then it's left to you to deal with it, because no one else, cops can't, council won't. It falls to you, the coalition. And the coalition likes to educate about this. Maybe if we just tell the community, they won't go in or something, but that tends not to work. So I think if folks are up for it, I'd start organizing a picket of these two places. And that would be my personal recommendation to a coalition if they couldn't get uptake in these other areas we discussed first. Kind of wondering, Allison, how's that hit you? Want to do a picket this weekend?
I think it's very intriguing. I'd love to see them either parallel to or just before explore the business permit piece, because there is local level for that, and county commissioners, by the way, folks, have a role. That if you've got a chronic non-compliant premises and you're not getting what you need from the liquor control board about how to handle that permit, or it just keeps changing hands within the family or something instead, you can also work that angle through the county commissioners, because they're used to just rubber stamping these permits unless they've heard something's wrong. So that's something that we can do locally and or use that as part of the threat, with the picket.
Particularly if you have some evidence.
To by those local leaders that they shouldn't just keep rubber stamping. They need to know what's going on at these different businesses. I'm sorry, Michael, go ahead.
No, you might be right. I mean, it may be that just the commissioners having a conversation with the store owner or the licensee saying, we've been getting reports that these things are going on here, even if they can't prove those reports, because there's this issue around being able to catch them potentially. That may be enough to wake them up as well, in which case you use you use that strategy of disrupting their licensing in some way or their permit in some way. So this goes to the earlier question I think Stephanie asked about what policy. I mean, this is exactly the kind of conversations that you have to have when there isn't an immediate fix, like we have team partying, okay, social hosts, or we have too many alcohol, that's okay, land use ordinance. When there's not the immediate, here it is, sitting on your lap, or in your lap, then you have to go through this process of deliberation about, okay, what might work, what's the science suggests is a possibility, and then come up with a couple of options. And so we really came up with three. One, the picket. Everybody loves a good picket now and then. Picket. Two, this notion of kind of working with your county commissioners around the reapplication or the renewal, I think is how you framed it, Allison. And three might be an ordinance with enhanced fines for anybody caught doing any of these kinds of things. All of those are possibilities, and maybe one's the right one. Maybe there's a fourth we haven't thought of, but that's the deliberative process that goes on when you're thinking about something like this. Any comments about this one before we go to the next one, which will be the final case study? All right. So this was also a place factor, and the condition was that prescription drugs are easily obtained by youth from family and friends. And so is the person who wrote this on the phone by any chance?
I don't think so.
No, I don't either. Okay. So the question for me as I thought about this particular condition, and this is not an uncommon kind of manifestation or framing of a prescription drug availability challenge, is, well, they're easily obtained, but where? Because the approach to addressing this from a policy perspective or an environmental perspective is you've got to disrupt the settings where the transfer of prescription drugs is occurring. Now, it could be that it's occurring everywhere. I mean, we've certainly heard that. But the more we dig down into communities and we say, okay, granted, people swap pills at school. People swap pills in the school parking lot. People swap pills after, football practice. When I ask the question, but where do they do it the most? There usually is a place. And so it may be people swap pills big time at parties. So it's not uncommon to find that underage parties or young adult parties is where a lot of the actual using of the of the OxyContin and the other drugs is occurring, and therefore there's a lot of hand-to-hand transfer of this stuff in those settings. And so one of the approaches then is to find ways to shut down and reduce those settings from being available. So social hosting is sometimes an answer to this. Sometimes folks will say, well, okay, they're getting them out of their parents' medicine cabinets. Also something we hear quite often. And when you say, well, what's a policy response or an environmental response to medicine cabinets? Educating parents to lock their cabinets is where most people go with that. And that educational piece by itself is this isn't going to do it. It's not strong enough. It's an important piece. It's a necessary but not sufficient strategy when you're talking about trying to figure out how to get the availability from homes to stop. Getting parents to sign pledges that they'll secure their medication is another strategy a lot of communities do. And again, those strategies, those kind of pledge programs by themselves don't work at the population level with enough people to really begin to drive down availability and therefore use. And so in this local condition that we're talking about here, the real question is where is the use of these pills at the swapping and the use occurring at large enough numbers where you can intervene on it through some particular kind of policy response. And we don't know the answer to that. So again, in one of the earlier discussions was how do you know what policy to use? And my response was, in part, you've got to really understand what the local condition is or what the local problem is well enough that you can identify, is it a place, product, price, promotion issue? So most often it's place, quite frankly, and then begin to go in and think about how can we address that P of place. In some communities, it's farm parties out in the outer 40. In some places, it's use at the beach or at the river or at the park, wherever it is, and then disrupting an environment by either a parks ordinance or a social host ordinance or whatever, or a stronger police policy to more strongly enforce, more regularly enforce those settings, do disruptive enforcement, is valuable because it raises the discussion in the community about the problem. So you not only get the community awareness ramped up and people going, okay, so it's worse than we thought, or okay, I didn't know about that. You also then get the benefit of the policy that passes, and once the policy passes, you begin to see normative change on the next side of it, and people begin to go, well, we should start locking up our meds. So you're more likely to get people locking up the medications. At least we believe you're more likely to get people locking up their medications or securing their medications in their home after you've had this dialogue around a new policy in the community than just educating the community they should do it. So in terms of case study number 2, is really not enough to nail what the appropriate 2 or 3 policy interventions could be, but I wanted to just throw out some possibilities. And this is my last slide. And then if there's any questions, we can take them. So there are some clear points that have emerged around doing this work and the challenges and opportunities to do this work. So the first we just talked about is really having a clear understanding of how the risk factor, that one of the 4 or multiple Ps, looks in your community. Where is it happening? What high-risk beverages are for sale? Those kinds of things. Really, where's the marijuana grow? Where are the marijuana grow houses, and what are they selling? How much are they selling the pot for out of the back door? Whatever it looks like, kind of thing. And that requires a different kind of data than most of us are used to collecting. The next is identifying and owning a policy. And I think this whole question of identifying the policy came out really early. And it is one of the interesting challenges is that we have is that there isn't research on every one of our local conditions in terms of what we should do. There's guiding principles in the research. And so that translation from science to practice is part of what you have Drug-Free Action Alliance for. You know, it's part of why they bring other folks on to do these kinds of webinars is to help think out loud with you about that. The owning the policy, if you decide to go down that route, basically means that you as a coalition write the policy. You never turn over writing a policy to somebody else. I don't care. You don't turn it over to the police. You don't turn it over to the city manager. You don't turn it over to your county council. You don't turn it over to the chamber representative. You write the policy because whatever you want to have happen in that policy needs to be a reflection of your coalition's sense of this is what it's going to take to fix the problem. And you throw everything plus the kitchen sink and new roof into that, because ultimately this is a political process, and it's one, as we all see in Washington, D.C., one of negotiation. And what you start with isn't what you're going to get. Just as what I started with every year trying to do a mandatory responsible beverage or server training bill in Sacramento, we never got, and so we basically opposed it. So own the policy, take responsibility, and get it done yourself. This organizing a grassroots base of power to make it happen, this is the stuff we don't do. This is the work most of us don't do. The intentional, relational community organizing that allows you to build power in your coalition from non-sector representatives or people who don't identify themselves as a sector. These are just folks you're finding who want to work on this issue with you. And so, you know, that's a skill set. It's one that most of us aren't familiar with, and it requires a lot of practice. That is something you can be trained up to do. If you want to do it, you can make it happen. Influencing decision makers to adopt a policy, whatever it is. You know, that process of deciding who, if you've got a city council and you've got 7 council members, you need to get 4 of them to vote your way. Simple as that. And so there's a entire process called a power analysis that basically allows a coalition to decide and understand for the 4 people you're sort of focused on, who can influence them, who can work from the top down, people who hold power who can influence them, and how are they going to, what do you need to do to build a base that they'll respond to, a base of grassroots. And so that power analysis process is the mechanism by which you influence your decision makers to ultimately vote for your particular policy. Using media advocacy, you'll note when I talked about the picket, that the picket itself wasn't the real interesting piece around this, although it's kind of fun. The real interesting piece around this is bringing media in and making this a public issue. And media advocacy, many of you have probably had training in it, but the distinction between social marketing, which is educating about the problem, and media advocacy is, in media advocacy, you not only educate the problem, you do a call for action for what your solution is, and you try and use that as a mechanism to rally people to come to the table. And then finally, the role of nonprofits. And this is a biggie these days because there's a lot of discussion out there about don't step over the lobbying line, don't use your federal dollars to lobby, and all of that's true. And so I'm not going to go into a narrative about what you can do under lobbying regs and how you can stay on this side of the lobbying regs. I think what I want to close with here is that every coalition should lobby. Every coalition should understand how to do it and figure out how to do it. Because unless you're willing to lobby, then you're not going to be able to move to the strongest interventions and the strongest policies that we understand. It may take you a while to get there, but to say our coalition can't lobby, our nonprofit can't lobby, is incorrect. Coalitions can lobby, nonprofits can lobby. You just have to know how to do it in a way that's legal. So we've done our hour and a half to the minute. I'm certainly open if anybody has any last comments or questions. Allison, if you have any comments or questions before we sign off, I'd be happy to take them.
Actually, I do, about number 2, about writing the policy and owning it yourself. Just any tips or recommendations you have in working with legal expertise so that the policy is congruent with law and appropriate, but still in order to own and drive it?
Yep, good question. So whether it's alcohol or whether it's prescription drugs and increasingly around marijuana, there are state laws that guide what localities can do. That's absolutely the case. And so in circumstances like that, where you're thinking, I'd like to do a alcohol, we have far too many bars and they're XYZ, creating XYZ problems, and our coalition wants to thin them out. What policy can we use? You do have to understand in that environment, that policy environment, what you can do legally at the local level and what you can't. And you have to turn to people like Drug Free Action Alliance and say, we want to do this ordinance that we heard about, a conditional use permit, and a deemed approved ordinance that we heard about at Alcohol Policy 16 or at CADGA. Can we do that? Do we have the authority to do that? Because if you go and ask your city council or your city attorney that question, most of them are going to say, yeah, you can't do it, because they don't know any better, frankly, or they don't want to do it, because it means too much work for them. So you go to Drug Free Action Alliance and you say, can we do it? And Drug Free Action Alliance either knows the answer to that or they go out and they talk to somebody. Like Jim Moser, one of our alcohol policy attorneys in the country, who knows a lot about these laws. And so once you know what you can do, once you understand that, yes, we have the authority, let's assume that for a moment, to do this particular policy we're interested in at the local level, at our city level, then the process is one of collecting samples and kind of going through a clearly defined process, which can be taught, about how you populate the sections of the policy that make it local to your community and make it have a greater chance of being passed. So first, figuring out legally whether you can do it. Go to Drug Free Action Alliance, assuming you can, pick up samples, read the samples, be familiar with it, and then walk through this process with your coalition. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you all for taking that little tour with me at the front end around trying to really unearth the challenges for doing this work. I was heartened to see that many of you are willing to jump in with both feet, and many of you were willing to sort of add to your policy plate with your coalition in combination with some of the individual strategies. So hopefully you all will be connecting with Allison and sort of exploring what some of those areas you are interested are, and then she can begin to provide you some support to make that happen.
And I'm also going to go ahead and offer up, I know that recently with SPECA, Emily Brown, who is our lead staff person helping with those customer relations with our SPECA members, she's already done some surveying of SPECA advisory and other SPECA members about training interests and needs. But coming off specifically this webinar in the environmental, I will do some open-ended questioning on the follow-up survey for evaluating this webinar to poke around about some very specific topics. I encourage you to look back particularly at webinar 1 slides and see what comes up for you or your notes from that, and put in some real specific training requests, and it'll either inform the development of the Alcohol Policy Conference shape and or future webinars as well. So please don't hesitate to ask for what you need. Michael, anything else to wrap us up?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Thank you all very much, and at some point I'll probably cross paths with you. So good luck in your policy work, and feel free to touch base with me through Allison or directly if you have any questions.
Great. All right. Thanks, Michael. And I'm just going to wrap up with a little bit of housekeeping. And thanks, Michael, once again, and thank all of you for participating in today's session, especially those of you who turned in your homework so that Michael could take a look at that and be thinking about how he could best customize today for everybody. Certificates of attendance will be emailed to you in a PDF format within the next 30 days. That 30 days is just there for our elbow room. It is likely to come much sooner than that. However, we do need to first receive your completed follow-up survey, which I will be emailing to you most likely on Monday. Probably will not yet happen today. If you are a group who attended as a group at One Computer, reminder to use that group sign-in sheet. And if you do not have one, you may get one from Kay Dowding at drugfreeactionalliance.org, which is who's been sending out all your confirmations. And this is the end of the webinar session, and I'd like to thank you again for joining us today.